The wind off the Moscow River was not mere weather. It was a physical entity, a predator of thermal energy birthed in the vast, frozen emptiness of the Siberian plain and sent west with malevolent intent. It clawed its way up the boulevards, a ravenous, invisible beast funneling between the monolithic Stalinist-era apartment blocks with a low, mournful howl that spoke of endless taiga, permafrost, and the profound indifference of the continent. It was a wind with teeth, finding the slightest imperfections in a man's defenses. The worn stitching in the collar of Kostya's utility jacket, the thin fabric stretched taut across his knuckles as he gripped a cold steel handrail, and sinking them in deep, 1,000 tiny, icy bites. The jacket, a drab, grease-stained thing the color of wet asphalt, was itself a masterpiece of aggressive anonymity, an article of clothing so utterly devoid of distinction it rendered its wearer invisible to the casual glance and forgettable to the studied one. It was the uniform of the unremarkable, the ignored, the men who toiled in the city's guts while its glittering, newly capitalist facade captivated the world. Inside the cramped, unheated confines of the Gazelle panel van, the air was a stratified cocktail of odors, a layered history of long hours and low-grade anxieties. At the bottom, clinging to the ribbed metal floor where the cold was most intense, was the metallic tang of steel and the faint, acrid scent of ozone from the humming electronics suite bolted to the interior wall. This suite, a custom-built rack of signal processors and recorders, was the van's true purpose, its black-painted face a constellation of tiny, winking LEDs. Above this technological layer, a permanent, hovering stratum of stale cigarette smoke, the ghosts of countless cheap, pungent Bellamore Cannel papyrusi smoked by the previous surveillance shift. Their distinctive cardboard holders, crushed and discarded, left a bitter, papery aftertaste in the air that no amount of ventilation could ever truly scrub away. And permeating it all, the smell of damp wool from Kostya's own clothes and the controlled, scentless patience he exuded like a field of null energy. He sat on a hard, fold-down bench, his posture a study in calculated relaxation, his body perfectly still, conserving energy. But his senses were straining, pulled taut like wires across the city, his gaze fixed on the small, 7-inch monitor. The screen displayed a jittery, low-light image, its refresh rate struggling against the encroaching darkness. The pixels shimmered with digital noise, resolving into a grainy, greenish tableau. The feed came from a telescopic camera, a German-made Schmidt and Bender PM2 with a custom night vision adapter, positioned on a rooftop 300 meters away and aimed with geodesic precision. The target, the Tverskaya Zastava apartment complex, a monument to late Soviet ambition that had been seamlessly absorbed into the new Russia of oligarchs and security state princelings. It was a brutalist fortress of precast concrete and sweeping panes of smoked glass, a vertical village for men who had traded their party cards for offshore corporations, but still understood that true power flowed from the Kremlin spires, just a few kilometers to the south. Men like General of the Army Arkady Volkov. A burst of static, a digital hiss designed to sound like random interference to any passing scanner, resolved into a tinny, distorted voice whispered directly into his auditory canal via a custom-molded earpiece. Status, Prizrak. Ghost. His operational call sign, earned during a long-forgotten and officially non-existent operation in the ruins of Grozny, and now the only name that felt real to him. The name Konstantin belonged to a man in a state file, a phantom with a fabricated history. Prizrak was who he was in the cold and the dark. The voice belonged to Yuri, his shift controller, nestled in the warmth of the primary command vehicle, a converted municipal street sweeper, a block away. Kostya had never seen Yuri's face, had no idea if he was old or young, fat or thin. He was just a voice, a disembodied presence as familiar and as vital as the rhythmic thump of his own heart. The signal connecting them was not merely encrypted. It was a ghost itself, a frequency-agile burst transmission hopping across a scrambled UHF range between 420.25 and 422.75 megahertz. Each microsecond burst was encoded with a 256-bit AES key that changed every tenth of a second, a digital cipher stream designed to be nothing more than meaningless, transient noise to any eavesdropping scanner. Visual on objective window, 7th floor, west-facing. Kostya murmured, his voice a practiced, sub-vocal monotone that barely disturbed the air in the van. Lights are out. Subject 2's vehicle, the Audi A8, registration number A731MP77, is absent from its designated parking space. Concierge is settled. Her nightly serial, Secrets of the Institute, has begun. The window is open. He didn't need to specify which window. For the past 72 hours, in a grueling 8-on, 16-off rotation with 2 other invisible men, he had done nothing but study the life of apartment 7B. He had absorbed its rhythms until they felt like his own. He knew the concierge, Svetlana, a babushka with a face like a worn leather boot and eyes that missed nothing, fortified her evening tea with a generous slug of Belankaya vodka at precisely 22:30. The clink of the bottle against the ceramic mug, a reliable acoustic marker picked up by a laser microphone aimed at her security booth. He knew General Volkov's wife, Elena, a woman who still wore French fashions from a decade ago as a kind of armor against the vulgarity of the new age. Drove to her sister's dacha in Khimki every Tuesday. A ritual of familial duty that had just become a catastrophic tactical vulnerability. Confirming from our end. Yuri's voice crackled, the words slightly clipped by the data compression. He was patching in feeds from other teams, weaving a web of surveillance around the target. A signals intelligence unit in another anonymous van was peeling back the layers of encryption on Volkov's communications like an onion, while a 2-man physical surveillance team was confirming Elena Volkov's arrival at the dacha. A grainy photograph of her exiting her car, time-stamped and uploaded to the secure server. Subject 1 is in his study. He's on a secure channel with the Belarusian KGB resident in Minsk. We project another 20 minutes on the call. The operational window is tight, Konstantin, tighter than procedure dictates. Kostya offered no reply. The time for words was over. He was already in motion, a study in fluid efficiency. He stripped off his rough outer gloves and pulled on a second pair that fit like skin, made of thin goatskin leather, dusted with fine, non-conductive graphite to defeat electrostatic alarms and leave no prints. On a small magnetic mat beside him, illuminated by a single red LED that preserved his night vision, lay the instruments of his craft. A set of titanium lockpicks, their profiles custom-milled for high-security Russian locks, gleaming dully like surgical tools. A miniature fiber-optic bore scope, the Krot 3 model, its filament no thicker than a horsehair, coiled like a sleeping serpent. And a small, dense cylinder of matte black tungsten that looked like an expensive fountain pen. He picked up the pen, its cold, significant weight, a familiar reassurance in his palm. It was the only weapon he carried. To carry a firearm was to anticipate failure, to plan for a scenario involving noise and witnesses and chaos. This was not such an operation. This was surgery. Inside the pen's hermetically sealed chamber, suspended in an inert propellant, was a misty, near-invisible aerosol. Its official designation was Compound 77B, but its creators in the FSB's Special Chemistry Unit 16, a place of silent laboratories and unspeakable science, called it Serce Stoi, heart stop. It was a masterpiece of malevolent science, a complex organometallic compound chelated with a rare earth isotope, europium-152. Colorless, odorless, it absorbed through soft tissue, gums, nasal passages, on contact. It was a ghost that haunted the bloodstream, undetectable by standard toxicology screens. Over a period of 2 to 3 weeks, its molecules would slowly, patiently, bind with the proteins in cardiac muscle tissue, causing microscopic crystallizations. The heart wall would weaken, thin, become brittle, and then, one day, under the slightest exertion, climbing a flight of stairs, an argument with a subordinate, a fit of coughing, it would simply tear. The official diagnosis would be a massive, yet tragically common, myocardial infarction. For a man of General Volkov's age and high-stress profession, a man known for his love of rich food and aged Armenian cognac, no one, not even the GRU's own meticulous medical examiners, would raise an eyebrow. The target was not an ISIS commander or a CIA station chief. General Arkady Volkov was one of them, a decorated officer of the GRU, the main intelligence directorate of the General Staff. He was military intelligence, a rival kingdom with its own budget, its own assets, and its own ambitions. And in the silent, undeclared war for resources and influence that was perpetually fought in the labyrinthine corridors of Moscow's security apparatus, the GRU had been winning. Volkov, brilliant, ruthless, and charismatic, was the tip of their spear. His operational file, which Kostya had been forced to memorize down to the last redacted footnote, was a hagiography of a modern Russian hero. Counter-terror operations in Syria, cultivation of high-level assets in Brussels, the quiet, deniable acquisition of sensitive NATO-adjacent microchip technology. But a single line in the final briefing, spoken by his handler, Colonel Pavel Ivanovich, in a soundproofed room in a dacha outside Moscow that smelled of dust, stale tea, and the subtle rot of old wood, was the only part of the file that mattered. He has forgotten his place. This was not an assassination. In the cold, dispassionate lexicon of the center, it was a personnel adjustment, a structural correction. It was a message, written in invisible ink, sent not to their enemies in London or Washington, but to their rivals across town at the Kodinka field headquarters of the GRU. The call is terminated. Yuri's voice snapped, the words sharp with urgency, pulling Kostya from his thoughts. He terminated it early. He's moving. Signal indicates he's leaving the study. Window is now 10 minutes, maximum. Go. Go now. The side door of the Gazelle slid open on well-oiled runners, a bare whisper of sound swallowed by the howling wind. Kostya stepped out into an alley, slick with a mixture of freezing rain and diesel fuel, the air thick with the smell of refuse from a nearby restaurant's overflowing bins. The wind hit him like a fist, trying to steal the air from his lungs. He moved without haste, his pace measured, his body language that of a man at the end of a long, weary shift, shoulders slumped, head bowed against the sleet. He crossed the street, a worn, gray ushanka pulled low over his forehead, its red star emblem faded and cracked. In his left hand, he carried a battered metal toolbox, its contents a few carefully selected, authentic tools of the gasman's trade. A heavy wrench, a pressure gauge, a roll of sealant tape, another layer of his carefully constructed fiction. The lobby of the Tverskaya Zastava was oppressively warm and smelled of boiled cabbage, industrial floor polish, and the cloying sweetness of a cheap, pine-scented air freshener struggling to mask the other odors. Svetlana, the concierge, sat enthroned behind a faux wood counter, her face a mask of bored suspicion, her eyes fixed on the flickering screen of a small television. She was the first variable, the human gatekeeper, the most unpredictable part of any infiltration. Kostya approached the counter, letting his shoulders slump, feeling the weight of the fictional 16-hour shift he was pretending to finish. He gave her a tired, world-weary nod, the kind exchanged by working men across the city. "Evening," he mumbled, letting a slight but distinct Ukrainian accent color his words. A small, pointless detail that might, in some future interrogation, send investigators down a completely useless path towards a phantom suspect from Donetsk. Gazprom. "We have a report of a minor pressure fluctuation on this line. Just need to check the main valve and meter on the 7th floor. He produced a forged work order from his jacket pocket, the paper artificially aged, stained with plausible grease marks, and stamped with official-looking, yet meaningless, violet ink. Svetlana squinted at it, her lips thinning into a line of disapproval. Her gaze flickered from the paper to his face, a slow, methodical assessment. "It is late for such work." "Pressure doesn't keep office hours, babushka," Kostya said with a weary shrug that was 90% genuine. "The pipes don't care what time it is. 5 minutes, I'll be quieter than a mouse in felt boots." She grunted, a sound of profound reluctance. But her job was to grant access to utility workers, not to argue with them. Apathy, Kostya knew, was a far more reliable ally than charm. She pressed a large, greasy button under her counter. A loud buzz echoed through the lobby as the magnetic lock on the interior security door disengaged. Her gaze, heavy and suspicious, followed him as he walked towards the elevators. He didn't look back. He could feel her eyes on him, a physical weight on the back of his neck, her suspicion a tangible force in the room. Inside the small, wood-paneled elevator car, he pressed the button for the 8th floor. A small, almost trivial piece of tradecraft, but a crucial one. Should Svetlana be watching the floor indicator panel above the doors, she would not see it stop at 7. He would take the fire stairs down one flight. Every action, no matter how minor, was a lie contributing to a larger fiction. The elevator was an old Soviet model, upgraded with a veneer of modernity, but still groaning and creaking its way upwards, the cables sighing in the shaft. Kostya's heart was a steady, metronomic drum in his chest. Fear was a chemical indulgence he had conditioned out of himself years ago in a windowless room at the Balashika training facility. In its place was a state of hyper-focused clarity, a cold, sharp-edged awareness that made the world seem to slow down. He could feel the low-frequency hum of the elevator's motor through the soles of his boots, smell the faint, lingering trace of a woman's expensive French perfume, Chanel No. 5, Elena's signature scent, and hear the distant wail of a police siren filtering up from the street below. He was not a man in an elevator. He was a sensor suite, absorbing data, building a picture of the environment second by second. He exited on the 8th floor into a hallway identical to the one below. He moved directly to the heavy fire door, pushed it open, and stepped into the concrete stairwell. The air was cold and dusty, smelling of stale concrete and disuse. He descended one flight, his soft-soled boots making no sound on the gritty steps. The door to the 7th floor corridor opened with a soft, pneumatic sigh. The hallway was empty, lit by dim yellow bulbs that cast long, distorted shadows. It smelled of wealth, the subtle scent of old leather from a Chesterfield sofa visible through an open doorway, an expensive, professionally installed air freshener system, breathing out a hint of cedar and the faint, cloying sweetness of lilies from a large vase outside one of the apartments. He moved to 7B Volkov's door. He knelt, placing the toolbox on the floor as a prop. He didn't open it. The tools he needed were already in his pockets. His first move was to pull out a small, flat device, a magnetic field detector. He swept it around the door frame, the jamb, and the threshold. Its small needle remained inert. No reed switches, no magnetic contacts. Volkov was either arrogant or possessed a different kind of paranoia. He believed the building's security, his doorman, and his own formidable reputation were deterrent enough. Or perhaps, Kostya mused, he understood that the only threats that truly mattered were the ones that didn't need to pick locks. A valid assumption on most nights. The lock itself was a Fortress 17 series, a high-security Russian model with 5 cross levers and a hardened steel bolt. A beast designed to resist drilling, bumping, and brute force. But every fortress has a keyhole. Kostya extracted the Krot 3 bore scope from his sleeve, feeding its impossibly thin, fiber-optic tendril into the keyhole. A tiny, distorted image appeared on the small screen strapped to his wrist. The 5 levers, the gate, the intricate warding. He had spent a full week in a soundproofed room at a dacha outside Moscow, practicing on an identical lock until his fingers could solve its mechanical puzzle by feel alone, his mind seeing the inner workings in perfect detail. He inserted the custom-made tension wrench, applying a whisper of torque, just enough to bind the first lever. Then the pick went in, a thin sliver of titanium, a short hook. It was a delicate, tactile conversation with the machine. He wasn't forcing it. He was coaxing it, persuading it. The first lever felt stiff, resistant. He eased the tension, reset, then tried again from a slightly different angle. A soft, almost inaudible click resonated through the metal into his fingertips. 1. He moved to the next. His breathing was a shallow, controlled process, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The only sounds were the faint, metallic scrape of the pick against the levers and the frantic, yet silent thumping of his own blood in his ears. 2, 3. He felt a single bead of sweat trace a cold path down his temple. This was the point of maximum exposure. A resident could emerge from an apartment. A cleaner could round the corner. A dog could start barking. 4. The 5th and final lever was stubborn. It resisted, a silent, mechanical protest. Kostya held his breath, his senses expanding to encompass the entire floor. He could hear the faint, muffled dialogue from a television in a neighboring apartment, the low groan of water moving through pipes in the walls. He applied a fractional increase in tension, nudged the last lever with the very tip of his pick, and felt the faintest of shifts as it settled into the gate. The core of the lock turned a single, beautiful millimeter. A deep, satisfying clunk, shockingly loud in the oppressive silence, announced the heavy bolt had withdrawn. He was in. The entire process had taken 93 seconds. He pushed the door open a fraction of an inch and paused, listening, smelling. He could hear music now. Classical. The final adagio of Mahler's Ninth Symphony. The sound, full of melancholy and resignation, came from the far end of the apartment, from the study. He slipped inside, a shadow detaching itself from the hallway, and closed the heavy door behind him so gently it made no sound. He did not engage the lock. An unlocked door was an escape route. The apartment was dark, save for a thin blade of light, slicing the darkness from under the study door. It smelled distinctly of its owner. A complex blend of expensive, sandalwood-based cologne, the dry, acidic scent of old paper from countless books, and the faint, metallic scent of ozone from the array of high-end electronics Volkov kept in his study. The apartment was obsessively, unnervingly clean. Not a book was out of place on the floor-to-ceiling shelves. Not a speck of dust was visible on the polished parquet floor. It was the home of a man who craved order, who exerted absolute control over every facet of his environment. A very dangerous man, Kostya moved through the darkness with a practiced, feline grace, his feet automatically finding the clear paths between the minimalist furniture. His first objective was not the study, but the bathroom. The mission briefing had included a complete set of floor plans, memorized and then incinerated. One master bathroom, one guest powder room. Volkov was a man of rigid habits. He would use the master. He found the door and pushed it open. The air inside was cool and smelled of antiseptic mouthwash and expensive Italian shaving cream. A small, automated nightlight cast a pale blue glow over pristine white tiles and gleaming chrome fixtures. And there it was, sitting in a ceramic holder next to the sink. The toothbrush. It was a high-end German Sonic model, its bristles a stark, clinical white. It looked utterly innocuous, a mundane artifact of daily hygiene. The most intimate of objects, used every morning and every night, without a second thought. The perfect silent vector for a ghost. He pulled the pen-like cylinder from his inner pocket. He twisted the base 1/4 turn to the right. A quiet click armed the ultrasonic atomizer. This was the point of no return. He held the nozzle a precise 2 centimeters from the bristles. He depressed the actuator. There was no sound, no hiss, no visible spray. Just a brief, shimmering distortion in the air. As the aerosol was released, a microscopic cloud of molecules settling onto the nylon fibers, clinging to them with electrostatic force like morning dew on a spider's web. The compound was designed to be completely absorbed by the soft tissues of the mouth, leaving no residue after the first contact with water and toothpaste. In 10 seconds, it was done. The ghost was in the machine. His earpiece crackled, a sharp burst of static that felt like an electric shock. Yuri's voice was a tense, urgent whisper. Movement. Prizrak, we have movement. The study door is opening. Abort. Get out. Ice-cold adrenaline, sharp and clean, flooded Kostya's veins. He hadn't been fast enough. The intelligence was wrong. The 20-minute call had been shorter. The window hadn't just closed, it had slammed shut. He did not panic. Panic was a luxury for amateurs, and it was always fatal. His mind, a cold, calculating machine, scanned the bathroom in a fraction of a second. There was nowhere to hide. The shower had a frameless, clear glass door. The vanity was a sleek, modern unit, flush with the wall. He could hear footsteps now, heavy and deliberate on the parquet floor of the hallway. The sound of expensive, hard-soled leather shoes. Volkov. He was walking away from the study, towards the front of the apartment, towards the kitchen, adjacent to the bathroom where Kostya now stood trapped. Kostya heard the soft click of a cabinet door opening, the sound of water running into a glass. He flattened himself against the wall behind the door, in the small, dark space created by its hinges, making his body as thin as possible, exhaling to shrink his chest cavity. His heart, once a steady metronome, was now a frantic prisoner, hammering against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to fight, to crash his way out. But years of brutal, unforgiving training held him in a vice of cold logic. Stay still. Be silent. Become part of the architecture. The footsteps stopped directly outside the bathroom. Kostya held his breath, his muscles coiled and screaming with tension. He could smell the general's sandalwood cologne, much stronger now, a rich, masculine scent that filled the small space. He could hear the man's breathing, a low, steady rhythm. The doorknob, a sleek bar of brushed steel, began to turn. This was it. The end of the clean operation. A close-quarters fight in a Moscow apartment. A body in the hallway. A failed mission that would be disavowed before his corpse was cold. He braced himself, his mind instantly cycling through the brutal, lethal techniques of systema he would need to employ. A strike to the throat, a thumb to the eye, the quickest, quietest way to end a life. The door swung inwards, its polished edge brushing against the sleeve of Kostya's jacket. He saw the gleaming black leather of the general's shoe, the razor-sharp crease of his tailored trousers. Volkov stepped into the bathroom, his large frame filling the doorway, his hand reaching for the light switch. Kostya was a compressed shadow, pressed into the 90-degree angle between the open door and the wall, completely shielded from view unless the general turned his head completely around and looked behind him. Volkov didn't. He flicked on the light. The sudden, sterile brightness of the vanity bulbs made Kostya's pupils contract in pain. He saw Volkov's reflection in the large, frameless mirror over the sink. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a magnificent lion's head of silver hair and a face that looked as if it were carved from granite. He looked exhausted, the skin under his eyes dark and puffy. He opened the medicine cabinet, the mirrored door swinging out, and for one heart-stopping second, Kostya saw his own masked face reflected in its beveled edge, a distorted, fleeting image of a dark phantom. But Volkov was focused on the contents of the cabinet. He took out a bottle of aspirin, shook 2 tablets into his large palm, and dry swallowed them with a grimace. He stood there for a long moment, his hands braced on the marble countertop, staring at his own reflection, lost in thought. Kostya remained frozen, a statue carved from terror and discipline. Every second stretched into an eternity. The general's right hand rested on the sink, inches from the toothbrush, inches from the invisible poison that now coated its bristles. He ran a hand over his tired face, sighed a deep, weary sigh that seemed to come from the bottom of his soul. And then, without a backward glance, he turned and walked out of the bathroom, leaving the light on and the door ajar. Kostya waited, counting the slow seconds, his ears straining. He heard the footsteps retreat down the hall, back towards the study. The door clicked shut. The melancholic strains of Mahler swelled once more to fill the silence. He exhaled, the breath shuddering out of him in a long, silent stream. He had been a hair's breadth from catastrophe. He moved silently out of the bathroom, pulling the door gently so it was nearly closed, exactly as he had found it. He retraced his steps through the apartment, a phantom in the dark, the general's tired, powerful face seared into his memory. At the front door, he paused, listening one last time. Nothing but the music. He slipped out into the 7th-floor corridor, pulling the door shut until it latched. He then inserted a special tool, a thin, flexible wire with a custom machined head, into the keyhole. With a delicate twist, he engaged the lock mechanism from the outside, turning the core and throwing the heavy bolt back into place. To anyone checking, the door was secure, untouched. He collected his toolbox and walked calmly to the stairwell, this time ascending to the 8th floor and summoning the creaking elevator. Down in the lobby, Svetlana was fully engrossed in her television serial, the flickering blue light reflecting in her glazed eyes. She didn't even look up as he walked past, out through the main doors and back into the biting embrace of the Moscow night. The Gazelle was waiting where he had left it, its engine a low, throbbing rumble. The side door slid open and he climbed in, stripping off the graphite-dusted gloves and the utility jacket as the vehicle pulled away from the curb, melting seamlessly into the river of headlights flowing down Tverskaya Street. He said nothing. Yuri knew better than to ask. They drove in complete silence for 10 minutes, putting distance between them and the operation, before the earpiece crackled again. "Report," Yuri said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but Kostya could hear the ghost of tension in it. "The package is delivered," Kostya replied, his own voice sounding hoarse and unfamiliar to him. The asset was active in the residence, extremely close contact. Compromise was narrowly averted. There was a long pause on the other end, long enough for 3 traffic lights to cycle from red to green. "Understood. But the mission is complete?" "Complete," Kostya confirmed. He leaned his head back against the cold, vibrating metal wall of the van and closed his eyes. He could still see the general's face in the mirror. A man at the apex of his power, a patriot by his own lights, condemned to die not by a foreign enemy, but by a bureaucratic rival. He had looked into the face of his target and seen a chilling reflection of his own world. A world of immense stress, suffocating secrets, and a profound, crushing loneliness. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of sterile routine, of sleep without rest, of waiting. Kostya moved through his life like a ghost, his thoughts a constant, low hum of anticipation. He maintained his cover as a mid-level manager at a logistics firm, a life of meaningless paperwork and feigned interest in shipping manifests. He was a loaded weapon, waiting for the distant report of its own firing. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, he was sitting in a smoky cafe on the Garden Ring, nursing a glass of black tea and watching the snow fall, when the news alert vibrated on his burner phone. The state news agency, TASS, reported the sudden and tragic death of General of the Army Arkady Volkov from an apparent heart attack at his home. He was lauded as a hero of the Russian Federation, a tireless defender of the motherland. Tributes from the Ministry of Defense and the Kremlin poured in. There would be a state funeral with full military honors. The mission was a success, a clean, undeniable, perfect success. That evening, a coded summons directed him to a sterile meeting room in a nondescript office building near the Lubyanka. His handler, Colonel Pavel Ivanovich, was waiting for him. Pavel was a small, neat man with watery blue eyes and the gentle, distracted air of a provincial school teacher, a carefully cultivated facade that concealed a mind of breathtaking, reptilian ruthlessness. "Konstantin," he said with a thin smile, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. "Tea?" "No, thank you, Colonel." Pavel Ivanovich steepled his thin, manicured fingers. "A perfect operation, clean, precise, no complications. The center is very pleased. Your bonus has been credited to the usual account." Kostya just nodded. He felt nothing. Not pride, not remorse. Just a vast, hollow emptiness. Volkov was a problem, Pavel continued, his tone that of a manager discussing a faulty piece of equipment. His ambitions were becoming misaligned with strategic state interests. His removal restores a certain equilibrium to the system. He paused, his pale eyes fixing on Kostya with unnerving intensity. "You are probably wondering why we chose such a complex, high-risk method. A car accident, a simple mugging gone wrong. It would have been so much easier." Kostya had wondered. The Serdsystoy vector was elegant, but the infiltration carried an immense risk of failure or discovery. "Volkov was paranoid," Pavel said, answering his own question. "But not about us. He was convinced a Western agency, MI6 specifically, was trying to recruit one of his deputies. He had initiated his own aggressive, internal counterintelligence sweep. A mole hunt. He trusted no one. Pavel leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, his eyes gleaming with intellectual pleasure. The compound you delivered, it has a secondary property, a marker. The europium-152 isotope I mentioned. It's inert now, undetectable. But in 6 months, during a planned exhumation for a routine state toxicology review, a new proprietary reagent will be used. And that reagent will cause the isotope marker to fluoresce under spectral analysis. It's a complex isotopic signature, one we have spent 5 years and a great deal of money painstakingly associating with a specific chemical weapons laboratory at Porton Down in the UK, via carefully placed disinformation in a half-dozen third-party intelligence streams. A chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature spread through Kostya's body. He was no longer just following the plot. He was seeing the entire architecture of the play. Volkov's death today is a tragedy. Pavel smiled, a thin, bloodless stretching of his lips. But the discovery in 6 months that he was, in fact, assassinated by British intelligence, that will be a crisis. A wonderful, deeply useful crisis. It will give us the political capital, the righteous justification, to purge the entire GRU European desk, the very network Volkov was grooming for his own ascent. We will brand them as incompetent or worse, penetrated. We will absorb their networks, their assets, their budgets. We will finally neuter our rivals, and we will do it while wrapping ourselves in the flag and decrying foreign aggression. Kostya stared at the bland, smiling face of his handler and saw the true, monstrous face of the state he served. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even an assassin. He was a stagehand. He had just placed a single, crucial prop, a poisoned toothbrush, in the first act of a grand, cynical tragedy that would end with a political purge. Volkov's death was never the objective. It was merely the overture. The real target was the entire GRU. You see, Konstantin, Pavel said, standing up. The audience concluded. It was never about killing one man. It was about creating a ghost. And now, our ghost will do its work. Kostya walked out into the Moscow night, the city lights blurring into streaks of cold fire before his eyes. He went back to his small, state-provided apartment, a place as anonymous and sterile as himself. He walked into his own bathroom and stood before the sink, the fluorescent light humming overhead. He looked at his own reflection in the mirror, the face of a tired man he barely recognized. And then his eyes fell on his own toothbrush, sitting in its holder, a simple, mundane object.